Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Exponential Potential. And we are full of the joys of spring this month, really giving you all of the tools and techniques and tactics that you can keep forging ahead. And I am delighted to be joined by Teresa Vozza. Teresa, hey, how are you?
Hi, Claire. I'm great, and I'm so happy to be here and to be with you and all your viewers.
I'm really looking forward to the discussion today because we're going to be talking about so many subtle ways that you can adjust your approach to have more balance and actually way more sustainable success. So let me introduce you, Teresa. Teresa is an award-winning leadership expert, keynote speaker, writer, and a former chief human resources officer for Fortune 500 company. But you're on a mission now to help executive professionals eradicate burnout and transform leadership from inside out. You've been a regular leadership contributor on an award-winning morning show in Canada called Breakfast Television, and your work is featured in Fast Company and Women of Influence. So I am super excited to have met you. I wish that I'd met you a few years ago.
I wish I met me a few years ago too.
But I'm really excited about this topic today in terms of burnout and hustle, and kind of how we can take back some of our power. So why don't you introduce the listeners to the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, I'm excited about this topic too. And, it's interesting. Before I introduce myself more fully, I will say that most recently I was having a conversation with someone who had indicated that they were so sick and tired of hearing about burnout. And quite honestly, I agree with them. And I had said that. I'm like, I agree. I'm sick and tired of hearing about burnout too, because the stats show that it continues to escalate. Even though we thought it might show some like a downward trend after the pandemic, it actually hasn't. And we're seeing that occur especially at the most senior roles in companies, but also at the middle manager level as well. Middle managers, directors, VPs, and up are all quite stressed. So I've started my journey into executive coaching, and it's exactly as you shared, Claire. I work with primarily women who are at leadership levels within companies who are either an emerging leader, they're getting promoted into their next level of leadership, or they're already there, but they're finding themselves overwhelmed, stressed out, and burnt out, and it's affecting their health or their productivity at work or their relationships, and in many cases, all of the above. And one of the things that I do is I work with them to start to develop self-regulation strategies, primarily through the nervous system. So really getting into the what I call in the moment strategy for helping them downregulate, become more coherent, and be able to respond in a way that is online and calm and clear and grounded. And also, as a result of that, improve their relationships, improve their ability to assert their boundaries if needed, and to have more agency in their career, the ability to make choices that are more empowered. And I came through this through my own story, as you and I were sharing before the call. I had a significant burnout episode in 2015, which I see now as my crucible moment, the moment where I was forced to really reckon with myself and ask the hard questions. And that was at the height of my career. It was actually just a month after I was promoted to vice president, a role that I had always wanted to be promoted to. And I was suffering quite obviously with validation and proving myself that I was deserving of this promotion. And it just put me into this vicious cycle of overwork, pleasing, double checking my work, checking in with everybody else to make sure it was okay, staying up until all hours of the night, making sure people saw me, sending emails at 9 or at 6 in the morning. Just this vicious cycle of proving, proving energy, which I see so many, especially new leaders, but also even existing leaders fall into that trap. And that's what leads to their burnout and their unhappiness. So I come in to help them untangle that web or that cycle and answer the hard questions. Is this in fact where you want to be? Are you doing the work that really aligns with your energy and your unique zone of genius, your skills, your capabilities? And if so, how do we put in structures and habits and processes that will enable them to be calm, not just at the end of the day, but throughout the day? So that's a little bit about what I do.
So for the listeners who, you know, are maybe concerned or maybe spotting some of those patterns or see them with friends, how does that show up in terms of self, the messages to self or behaviors or kind of what patterns will they be seeing?
Yeah. Well, a part of my background is also that I'm a trauma informed coach, and what that means and why that's relevant is that so much of our habits and ways of behaving are conditioned. They're they're just they're coming from childhood of origin stories. They're coming from past relationships, whether good or bad, and so we create habits as a result of how we were conditioned. And so part of understanding and the relevance of that really is to understand that it's not their fault, because I think
Mm.
sometimes what happens is a lot of people come to me and they say, why do I always do this, and I am so dot dot dot. And so the first thing to really smash is that belief that they're somehow defective and that there's something that they were born with that is so maladaptive. And so we really work on just starting to untangle those conditioned tendencies. So the habits that you have today, where they were formed, not from a place of let's stay there and go back, but from a place of understanding, having empathy, having compassion, and then creating new, more adaptive ways of behaving in the future. So, for example, the biggest one I see there for executives or even for leaders of all levels is the ability to say no, the ability to set personal limits. I don't even always use the word boundaries because I think that's a word that gets so overused. I understand it, but I think what's more important is what are the personal limits that you place between work and not working, and how do you honor that? And then how do you develop the courage and the fortitude to disagree or to delegate or to say no to something that may not be in your realm of work, but you've been conditioned as a young girl or a young man to just say yes. For example, I grew up in an immigrant Italian family, and they were all blue collar workers, and getting food on the table was very important. And so my dad instilled in me an ethic of when people give you work, you say yes. And so no is not an option. And I had no idea how that would play out in my leadership career until I did the work of understanding, oh, this is why I find it so hard, is because it's been instilled in me that no is a rejection, that no is not going to take you far, that it's actually rude, when in fact the truth is in many cases probably one of the kindest things you can do for yourself and for the companies, start to assert some limits. So just understanding that first is really, really important when it comes to burnout and the messages that you tell yourself about how you work and why you work and so on.
And I want to hold us there really, because I think one of the reasons why this can be such, not dangerous, but such a risky area for for many people, especially women, is that when you start to experience this, you start to doubt whether you're good enough. And so it plays into a lot of fears that you might have about your abilities, or you might be operating within a competitive environment. We've been talking about kind of toxic environments, and you're rushing because of the people around you, and it almost has nothing to do with you, but the hurt and the harm
Yeah.
it's on you.
Yeah. Well, and what you're pointing to too, which is I think is so important, is environment and what I call inputs and outputs, right? So, what are the inputs into your environment? And those are, the people that you surround yourself, the people that you work with, the culture in which you work in, because there are toxic workplaces and there are psychologically unsafe leaders and environments. And so it is important to understand that. But by the same token, too, I think taking an approach that's focused external and not taking into account the internal messaging that is within you is it's not a fulsome approach. It's not a fulsome recovery plan because circumstances are often outside of our control. But what's within our control is the choice, the agency, the ability to understand what your capabilities are and what they're not, what's non-negotiable, what isn't. So it is important to take into account the internal and the external.
Well, absolutely. And you can see how people might move to a different job or to a different organization. And without the inner reflection, without the inner work, can often be caught in similar situations. Whereas there's a real opportunity for people to thrive.
Yeah, I agreed. And there's I don't know about you, Claire, but there's so much information out there now about personal growth, limiting beliefs, how to break free. There's so much information. And I think that on the one hand, that's a really good thing because I think that there is more attention placed on this topic of burnout and well-being and holistic health and all of those different things. But on the other hand, there's almost too much information. And that creates like this cognitive load that becomes draining in and of itself. And so it's really, I think, probably even more difficult for people to sift through, well, what do I do? Because there's all these strategies out there and I don't even know where to start. And my strong recommendation, for your listeners and for anyone really, is that it has to be inside first. It just has to, right? External out are just tactics. That's why I jokingly say, like, I can hand you a boundary script, no problem. And you can go out there and try to state them and they'll fall flat because you don't have the emotional belief within, the conviction and the courage that has to be built for you to stand on your own 2 feet and from a really firm, calm, grounded place, be able to set a limit. So yes, there's tons of information, but how-tos and tactics and the practical strategies out there, that's only half of the answer, and that is the last half. The first half is really understanding what are your conditioned tendencies, what are your habits, what were your shaping forces that gave rise to the way you react and respond in the world. And then from there, start to develop new ways through practice of being in sometimes even toxic environments and other times just in everyday life. Yeah. I use this with my son all the time. I'll always try to, he's 12 and I know we were talking about that, but if he talks about something happening at school, I'll start to ask him, well, when did you first start to feel this way? And, so I start to really help him develop the language of understanding that things don't just appear, they are shaped. So let's understand how they were shaped so then that we can kind of go back and start to implement any repair that might be needed at that time.
It's also it's developing that literacy and that skill set to be able to adapt in any future situation. And we shared that I'm a mum to a 13-year-old, and I'm at a point where kind of some of the parenting strategies are I've just got to hope that we've done enough so far because his
Yeah.
friends and his teachers have so much more sway. He probably listens more to Ronaldo than he does to me. Me around the dishwasher. And Ronaldo, if you're listening, please do an Instagram feed about you
Oh,
filling a dishwasher because my life would be so much easier.
it's
But there
true.
we go. Yeah. Um, so one of the phrases that I hear you mention is the sense of hustle without the hurt. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I again, partly because I grew up with an ethic of hard work, and partly because I believe that much of my success came from, if you could probably call it hustle in today's modern world terms. I would have probably called it more hard work back in the day. But I think that hustle is another one of those words that I think has become vilified in the media and in writing and in, speakers and gurus and so on. And I think what's important to understand is that there is such a thing as a healthy hustle. There is such a thing as the type of hustle that's born of hard work, and that could include longer sprints of work where you are working 10 hours a day versus 8, or you are doing more than you would normally do um, under normal circumstances. But there's a difference. And the difference is really around how aligned you are with the work that you're doing. And what the difference is also, what is the feeling that you generate while you're in this place of sprinting or putting in longer hours, and also understanding that throughout that sprint you are regulating, you're putting in practices to down regulate. That could be a 10-minute walk, it could be stretching, it could be a quiet coffee with your partner, with your children. It's about making sure that it's just not full on and without any what I call intentional breaks in the pattern or in the sprint. I think that type of hustle, and I still do that. I'm still a type A type of person. I like to work, and I can go for a good length of time. The difference between me now and me from 2015 when I burnt out is that I'm no longer proving myself with such urgency. I'm no longer just going without stopping for micro breaks. And I'm no longer hustling on work that doesn't really fuel my soul. And so there's a difference between that kind of a hustle, which I think is healthy and harmonious and holistic, versus the kind of hustle that's like, I just got to get this out, I got a deadline. But meanwhile, your insides are just full of resentment, full of anger, full of irritability, not enjoying the work, and then just going. Which unfortunately, that's where I see a lot of my clients come in, is that they're ignoring a quiet voice that's saying, you don't really like this work, or you don't really like this job, or you are really, there's something that you are not bringing up to the surface, and this hustle and hard work is covering it. Because I think overwork is addictive, and I think that it can be a form of escape. So we will only know that once we get quiet and really start to pay attention to what's underneath the vicious cycle, if you will.
And as people move into management, and whether it's middle management or senior management, there's a whole range of different admin tasks. So a whole
Mm.
range of busyness that comes through that gets layered into this sense of hustle. Is so would
Yeah.
you say that with the work that you've done and the work that you do with clients, you start to unpack that so that you're more discerning about where you put your energy?
Oh, yes, especially because managers or those are into or leading people, they have an added responsibility now because it's not just their own well-being. There's another layer of responsibility for ensuring the well-being of others within the workplace. And so that means that we need to start bringing in what I call a wise discernment muscle. And when we are wisely discerning, that means we are asking ourselves the question, what is most important? What is most important for me to delegate to someone else for the right reasons? What is most important for me to communicate? So there's a lot of discerning happening. Like, do I talk about this? Do I not? Do I delegate this? Do I not? Do I, quote unquote, discipline this person for constantly being late, or do I just let it go? There's a lot more fatigue because the decision making is now increased, and the task switching, which can be draining, has also increased once you move into any type of supervisory or management role. So when I work with new leaders, I think first and foremost is helping them understand that you are called to more, and this is what more looks like. And part of that is also really getting clear on decision making and how do you apply this wise discernment with your people, practice, and also I would say compassion, because especially for newer leaders, you're going to get it wrong. I mean, we all did. And so I think there's a little bit of grace and compassion that needs to come into the new leader training, if you will, and new leader coaching, because they're going to be working a muscle that they may not have had to work when they were an individual contributor or when they only had to manage one or two people. So it really is important that we start bringing in the ability for new leaders to decide within themselves what is important and what is not, or else they'll burn out. Because what I see sometimes is rather than delegate, they just do it all themselves because they want to avoid conflict, or they don't think it's good enough. And then what ends up happening is you go on another burnout cycle as well. So it's a tricky place to navigate. But if you get it at the very beginning and help them along in their first 6 months, they have a much better chance of success, I believe, than if you intervene 2 years down the line when habits have been ingrained and they're just going.
Yeah, and also it's a way of we talk about breaking generational cycles, don't we? But it's a way of breaking
Mm.
behavioral cycles within businesses that says you don't have to hustle to get promoted.
Yeah.
You don't have to be you don't have to be seduced into presenteeism or being shown stuck up to the boss. There are other ways of
Yeah.
achieving your goals.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's another common belief, is that in order to move ahead, in order to get promoted, you have to hustle all the time. And again, hustle is not a bad thing. It's not an unhealthy thing. It's helped me tremendously in my days of quote unquote climbing the ladder. But what's different today is the energy in which you do it. So there are times for you to perhaps put in that extra hour because you really love what you're doing and you do want to make a positive impression on the boss. No problem. No one's saying that it's a bad thing to want to impress your boss or to deliver a bang up presentation. I'm all for that. And I help clients do that and have that confidence in that voice. The difference is when we over index too far on the side of perfection, and we're operating at an unsustainable pace. So rather than once or twice or 3 times a week where you're putting in some extra time, you're doing it full 24/7. And you're waiting for a validation or a response. And when you don't get it, you work harder. So it really is about knowing when enough is enough, and then step back and trust that your work is being seen or is visible. I think that's an important piece to this as well.
Mm. And kind of that what we've unpacked there is there are many reasons why we hustle. It could be beliefs about the culture that you're working in, beliefs about women in leadership roles, as you've discussed as well, kind of your family beliefs or how you've grown up as a child or through school, and kind of so many reasons why. Um, is that all of the reasons why, or are there other reasons that you've seen why people hustle?
I think you probably touched on the most important, but I think, you know, when we work really hard on something, or when we put in, or when we are hustling, there's an outcome that we're hoping to achieve, right? And usually it's either a promotion, a client, a book of business. There's something that we're going for. And I think part of understanding why we hustle, yeah, first and foremost is how you were shaped. What are those shaping forces, and what did you learn from them? What are the conditioned tendencies or the habits that they created? Is number two. And I think number three is, what are the outcomes you're hoping to achieve? And is this the only way in which to achieve them? Are there other more harmonious alternatives in order to achieve them? And really making sure that we go through what those are. And what's not been talked about here, but I think it's been somewhat um, intrinsic, is like your inner compass, like your value alignment. Are you doing what you're doing in service to something bigger, whether that's to yourself or to the company or to a cause? But hustle will feel really good if it's aligned to something bigger, or it's aligned from an inner place and it's it's value driven. When it's not, that's when it starts to hurt. And so I think that's an important consideration as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also add that hustle is also addictive, right? I mean, we haven't talked about addiction, but overwork is an addiction. Um, so sometimes we do that to escape, and to escape something or someone, or yeah. And so I think it's important to understand, probably that comes out in your shaping forces and the conditioned tendency work, but is, what are you running away from? If in fact you are, what is it that you need to face and reckon or answer for yourself? And that's probably why this work, for some people, it scares them at first because they're afraid to answer that question. But my experience has shown that once they do, there's freedom on the other side.
Mm. And what strikes me in your description there, those, really, they're simple to say tasks, but kind of to really do the work, they are tough. Is for many listeners that will feel almost luxurious, or I haven't got time to do it. I haven't got time to do it. But actually, much like planning, the return on investment is incredible. Would you agree?
Oh my goodness. Time is always the biggest objection, I think, to any type of deeper personal work, whether it be coaching, mentoring, training, reading books. Time is always the number one. And my answer to that is, consider your relationship to time, because that too is something that's been shaped. It's a belief that you've held on to really, really strongly. And so to consider, what does it look like to not have time be a constraint? Because the truth of the matter is, and I say this very cheekily, but I agree, I believe it, everyone has 5 minutes. Everyone has 5 minutes. I think everyone has probably way more than that. But when you look at the time that you scroll, and when you look at the time you're on social media, and then you look at the time that you may just be, doing other things that are not exactly feeding you, you will find the time is not the problem. The time is a very convenient way to not look, to say no. And I find that quickly gets dismantled once we start working together. And you probably find that too, Claire, in your work. But it is a self imposed way of saying no to yourself. And it's a habit. It's another habit. It's nothing more than
Yeah.
another habit.
Yep. 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 Or kind of the habit of caring for. I don't have time, or I need to put my children's needs first, or
Yes.
my partner's needs first, or my parents' needs first. Just again, it's another way where you're saying yes to somebody else, but forgetting that that yes comes at a cost very often.
Yeah, and
Mm,
also when you do say yes to as little as 5 minutes or whatever it might be, I'm saying 5 minutes rather facetiously, but when you do say yes to doing the work for yourself, inner work that creates an external outcome, again, results do matter. So you do want the client to experience a result. Um, you are actually doing something for all the people around you as well. And that's what I see time and time again in my work like without question, their personal relationships are improved. It just has to, because they feel differently, and when you feel differently you act differently around the people closest to you. It has a ripple effect, and I think that's something that we don't often remember, that by saying yes to you, you're actually saying yes to others as well,
yeah,
inadvertently.
yeah. The other luxury that many people think of as a luxury is around this sense of self care. But you think we get it all wrong. What do you mean by that?
No, I have I have a bee in my bonnet about a lot of things, but no, honestly, I want to be very clear. My issue with self care is more around what I think has been done in the media around self care. I The words in and of itself, caring for the self, I absolutely am fully 100% behind. But I think too often we have associated self care as a thing, as a thing we do, right? Like a bubble bath is what we often hear about, or going to the spa, or going for a run, which again, all healthy things. But those are things or activities. I see self care as a process. And what I mean by that is it's a process of internal inquiry. It's asking yourself on a consistent basis, what do I need most today? What do I need less of today? And I see it as see it as active care, not necessarily self care. It's like active care. And when you're actively caring for yourself on a day in, day out basis, you are automatically caring for the self. And yes, sometimes that is a thing, that's movement, but other times it's sitting down and asking yourself the harder questions. What am I running away from? What am I unwilling to face? What do I need most right now? Um, and that could be, coherent breathing. It could be speaking to a coach. It could be reading a passage from a book. It could be a number of things. But first and foremost, it's a process of caring for yourself on a daily basis. And that process also includes inquiry, not just things you do, like going to buy something or going to the spa or whatever it might be.
And I mean, the interventions that come from that can be really gentle. Uh,
Yeah.
that's what I love. You don't have to wait for an almighty burnout to be. My experience, I was like a husk on the settee with absolutely nothing left and exhausted. You don't have to wait for that.
Mhm.
And wherever you are, you can start to adopt those practices of self-inquiry and active care. I love that.
Yeah, so nice the way you put it, because I think one of the bigger dangers that organizations face today and leaders face today is that we have normalized our pace. We have normalized overwork. We have normalized being too busy. And I think because we've normalized it, we won't do anything unless it's a big bang, unless it's like an anxiety attack or a health scare or something very big.
Mm.
And as you and I were talking before the recording, is I would implore listeners to not or to reframe the way they think about overwork and stress and burnout. It is not necessarily a big bang thing. It's tiny accumulated stresses that happen throughout the day that just over time create an enormous wear and tear, not only on your physical health, but on your emotional health and on your social health and on your friendships and everything. So it's really understanding that most people might not be carried out on a stretcher like I was. Like, that was a very extreme form. Most people will just live with it and have it be accumulated day in and day out, and continue to feel increasingly unsatisfied at work, and never understand what to do or how to get out from under it. That to me is the sadder outcome of burnout that I think we don't talk too much about, or enough about, I should say.
And our relationships decay at the same time, and or you find different fixes in different ways. But what struck me most from an organization level is you talk about the hard work must work harder. And there are so many different events that are happening in the world right now. The level of uncertainty that businesses are operating is just going through the roof, whether it's kind of geopolitical tensions or new elections or technology. So many senior leaders try to control their way out of that. And very often that drives, have to work harder. Whereas actually, work smarter, spend a bit more time reflecting and planning and observing and discerning those next steps. So I can definitely see how from an organization side, this is a problem that will grow more and more, at least over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I was at a conference just before the holidays where it was a panel of CEOs and chief HR officers, and they were talking about the new world of work. And it's getting to the point that you mentioned. Is one of the questions that was asked of the panelists was, what do you think is the most critical and missing skill that's required for organizations and leaders in going forward? And they were quite adamant. It's resilience. It's the ability to adapt to complexity and change that is not going anywhere. It's happening all the time. And unfortunately, when we don't develop those resiliency skills, we are a recipe for burnout and mental health crisis and people going off on leaves because the pressure is too great at work. And so organizational leaders really need to take heed to the fact that if you are going to lead an organization where there's a constant disruption and change, which is, again, it's on a global scale, you need to also make sure that you are equipping employees to build their bandwidth and build their resiliency in a sustainable way, and not just from a scorecard metric standpoint, but from a deeper corporate well-being and employee well-being perspective. And if organizations are missing that, they will continue to see people quit, burn out, and leave.
All right. I've loved our conversation. I've got kind of, before I get into how people can continue the conversation with you or follow your work, I just want to ask if you've got one key message for listeners, in this time of March, a real opportunity to bring new habits in over the next few months.
Yeah, what comes to my mind is take stock. Just, if you're listening to this, just sit down and take stock and ask yourself, what do I need to stop doing? And what do I need to let go of? And what do I need most? Just a simple taking stock. You could sit down 5 minutes, just journal, stream of consciousness, write it on paper, write it in a computer, and just allow yourself to consider a house cleaning and consider what might help you move into spring with a little more lightness and levity to your work.
So how can people stay in touch with your work? How can they get involved and learn more?
Well, thank you for asking. Very easy. There's two things I'll offer. They can go to my website, teresavozza.ca or .com. I have both domains. And or I have a free micro course on harmonious hustle and what that looks like and how to tell the difference. And they can download that for free on my website as well. So probably the two best ways, and you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out, and I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn as well.
Gorgeous. So I'm going to take us back to two words that you brought through, and you probably don't remember them in the interview, but you'd mentioned grace and compassion as being really key in, I think, in terms of the context, it was around as you're starting a new role. But those qualities are really important in terms of that self-reflection, in terms of active care, in terms of they're definitely qualities that you embody, by the way. Acknowledge them. But grace and compassion, uh, irrespective of your gender, are key. I think they're really important in moving forward, and I really want to honour that you've brought those to the table as a reminder.
Well, thank you so much. Those two words really sit in my heart. They really resonate, and I'm glad they resonate for you and hopefully our listeners as well.
So, guys, this is another great episode where you just need to go back and listen again with a notepad by your side, because there are so many elements, so many practical tips, challenges, questions that need to cut through the noise to you to really help you to thrive and to grow. Teresa, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to explore this topic of harmonious hustle and hard work that completely relates to so many aspects. But it's been
Well, thank
great
you.
fun today. So,
Thank you. Pleasure
and
being.
and to everybody else, there's going to be show notes here. So do tap into the work that Teresa's leading and join us again for another episode of Exponential Potential. Thank you. Bye bye.